As the offseason continues to roll on for the Silver and Black, Klint Kubiak's coaching staff continues to grow. That plus more on Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for February 18th, 2026.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one sports podcast network. We're very proud of that. We're also very proud of the fact that this show grows each and every day, and that's because of your support and the great job that my man Ari does behind the scenes, making sure we look good and sound good each and every day. So we shout him out. We appreciate him. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well, as many of you do, at your boy Q254. And if you want to be a part of the show, we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. We'll try to get as many calls in as possible coming up. Segment number 3. I know lately I've only been able to get a few in here and there, but I'll try to get as many in as possible because we really do have a lot of great feedback, and that's because of you, Raider Nation, and the fantastic job you do interacting with the show. So we thank you so much for that, and we'll definitely get in as much as possible to close things out. That'll be segment number 3. Segment number 2, you'll hear from Brian Nemhauser. He's actually a Hawks blogger, hawksblogger.com, covered the Seattle Seahawks for like a glove, put out a really good tweet that had me thinking and had Ari thinking and really got him to be a guest on my radio show on Tuesday, talking about the offensive line and in particular the center position and why it's so important for the Raiders to get that position right in a Klint Kubiak offense. So you'll understand and hear what he has to say about that coming up in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, just news and notes of the day, and it really just has to do with Klint Kubiak and his coaching staff. We'll jump into that after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. Use your profit boosts on the NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Playing your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, a few notes on Klint Kubiak and his coaching staff. Not a whole lot of movement on Tuesday. Rick Dennison, a guy that we talked about on Tuesday's show, was wondering if the Raiders were going to make it official. Have not made it official with him as of yet. Again, he's a guy that's expected to coach up the offensive line in some capacity. This was a report that CBS Sports had, and as I mentioned on Tuesday's show, nothing is official until the Raiders actually put it out. The expectations are that Rick Dennison will be on that coaching staff. Talked to Kirk Morrison on my radio show on Tuesday, and he said he was excited about Rick Dennison, thinks he's a good addition, so I have a good feeling that that's going to happen. But until it's actually, like I said, put out there by the Raiders, it's not official, and we don't know what his exact role is as of yet. Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network tweeted this out late on Tuesday. The Raiders are expected to hire Zach Azzanni as wide receivers coach per source. Azzanni will enter his 10th season in the NFL, was most recently with the Steelers. Again, that's from Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network. So it's funny, when this report came out, I was actually part of doing my ESPN show, Game Night, on ESPN Radio, so I didn't have any time to really reach out to someone and get some details on what Azzanni brings to the table. But then I remembered Brooke Pryor covers the Steelers like a glove, so I said, you know what, during a commercial break, I'll just shoot her a text and say, hey, what could you tell me about Azzanni, just trying to get a little bit of information as I see that the Raiders are about to hire him to be their wide receiver coach. And she responded like that. Like immediately. I mean, I barely pressed send, and all of a sudden that text came back. He's awesome. One of my favorite guys from the last staff. He's a great quote and a personable guy. He was a tough coach who would really get on guys, hold them accountable, etc. He and George got into it a couple times. I was really bummed he wasn't retained. You've got a good one to cover. Again, that's from Brooke Pryor from ESPN talking about Zach Azzanni, who's going to be hired as the wide receiver coach for the Silver and Black. So after my show got wrapped up at 10 p.m. Pacific time, then I went and started doing a little bit more research, reached out to my guy Chris Carter, Locked On Steelers, and heard a couple things that he had to say about Azzanni. And what Brooke said is spot on. Not that I questioned her, but you just like to hear it from a couple different people that this dude is tough as nails. He would get on George Pickens, and we all know George Pickens was kind of a wild child. He was one of those guys that, was kind of a loose cannon. Obviously, the Steelers traded him to Dallas. He had a big-time season. Matter of fact, a great season. He's going to cash out one way, one how. Maybe they hit him with the franchise tag. Maybe he gets a long-term extension. But he's one of those guys that's not for everybody's locker room. But Azzanni had a way of just coaching that dude up and really getting after him. And like Brooks said, and Chris did as well, that at times they got into it because he was riding them so hard. But I think that's good for this Raiders coaching staff, and it goes back to what Klint Kubiak said in his opening press conference when he was talking about the defensive coordinator. He was looking for somebody that was going to rip into guys if they weren't given the maximum effort. Well, guess what? George Pickens, one of his big problems in Pittsburgh was effort. Remember, he's the guy that during the game, the ball was on the ground, and he just stood there and acted like he wanted nothing to do with trying to pick it up. That's effort. That's effort that's not going to be acceptable with the Raiders under Klint Kubiak. And that's why a guy like Robbie Leonard has been brought in. He's a fiery guy, where Klint Kubiak, he's kind of mild-mannered, he's chill, he's relaxed, he's very like Tom Flores-like, where he's not going to get all fired up. Robbie Leonard will get fired up, right? Joe DeCamillis will get fired up, the special teams coordinator. Well, guess who else will? Yeah, Zach Azzanni. So you have that kind of fire on the coaching staff when you have the head coach being kind of mild-mannered and chilled and relaxed, but then you got a guy like me that's all fired up and let's go, right? Like that's what it's all about. That's the kind of blend that you're looking for, but a guy that holds guys accountables, right? I mean, he's a guy that even coached up Antonio Brown. And remember, for the longest in Pittsburgh, nobody knew Antonio Brown was a problem, right? Mike Tomlin did a really good job of keeping it under wraps what AB was all about until, well, he ultimately got traded to the Raiders. Then that's when you really started to realize who he was. It was a little bit before there. You started to see a little cracks in the armor and realize, yeah, this dude's got some issues going on. But it wasn't long after, after that happened, they got rid of him, moved on from him, just like they moved on from George Pickens, and then he became the Raiders' problem, and then he became everyone else's problem. Well, George Pickens right now, he's the Cowboys' problem, and he's got, some loose ends and some loose wires, and he hasn't got paid yet. Can you imagine what he's going to do when he gets paid? I was saying on my radio show on Tuesday night, I couldn't imagine franchise tagging that guy, because that's the reports that the Cowboys are going to franchise him. I couldn't imagine him giving him plus $30 million a year, right? I mean, and if he hasn't got paid yet, and he's already and he's acting the way he is now, can you imagine what he's going to do once he gets some money? Like, that's the situation, but that's a Jerry Jones situation. That's not one that the Raiders have to worry about. That's why a lot of people hit me up. It was like, man, what do you think about bringing George Pickens as wide receiver number one? Nope. He's not going to fit with what the Raiders are trying to do in that locker room. John Spytek is not trying to bring anybody like that. If you can remember and go back to what they did, their philosophy in Tampa Bay, they got all the great players on their big board. They numbered them in their order of preference. Who was the best player on their big board, who was number 2, number 3, then they went through it, and they removed all the D-bags. Their words, not mine, right? That's what they said. All the guys that they thought were D-bags that weren't good character dudes, they took them off their big board. And matter of fact, they said, and Jason Licht, the GM there in Tampa Bay, said if he had known Devin White a little bit more than he did when they drafted him, he wouldn't have drafted him. Now, I know John Spytek had a good relationship with Devin White, but just kind of shows you how much they mean business when they're talking about removing the guys that aren't high character dudes. And that's why when you look at the Raiders locker room right now, and I've said it many times, I don't care what player you're talking about that they've brought in through the 2025 draft class, every one of those dudes are high character guys. So I'm pretty excited once they make the Zach Azzanni hiring official, the wide receiver coach, just because he's going to bring some fire. He's going to bring some more juice to that coaching staff. So as it stands right now, the head coach is Klint Kubiak. Offensive coordinator is Andrew Janocko. Defensive coordinator Robbie Leonard. Assistant head coach Mike McCoy. Special teams coordinator Joe DeCamillis. Defensive line coach Travis Smith. Safeties coach Matt Robinson. Defensive pass game coordinator Joe Woods. Rick Dennison, not made final yet, so I don't know exactly what his position is. And wide receiver coach expected to be Zach Azzanni, coming over from the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that's the latest and the greatest when it comes to the coaching staff. Obviously, Klint Kubiak is doing everything he can in his power to get this coaching staff put together before the scouting combine comes up next week in Indianapolis, where I will be starting on Monday to bring you all the sights and sounds and everything good. So it's a great time out in Indy every year. It's going to be super cold, so hopefully I don't come away with the cold. Right, already had one coming back from the Super Bowl, but definitely don't want to get caught up in that East Coast chill. But we'll have a good time at the scouting combine next week. But coming up in segment number 2, talked about free agents on Tuesday's show. Talked about guys that were outside of the building that were high on my wish list. Well, I'll talk about and highlight a couple of them coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about one of the great sponsors we have here on the show, and that is TurboTax Full Service. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with the local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. And they'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every single deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. So for a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file your taxes last year, just file by February 28th. Time is ticking. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Wanted to get into a couple of the free agents that I talked about on Tuesday's show. And really, this did not come about on purpose. This is actually something that caught Ari's attention, and he brought it to my attention. And somehow we came together and made this work for the radio show on Tuesday. So Brian Nemhauser, Hawks blogger, hawksblogger.com, does a fantastic job covering the Seattle Seahawks. Has done it for quite a while. I've known of him for a while. I've never had him on my radio show before, but I known of him. Anyway, he put out a tweet that caught Ari's attention. It said, "Just a heads up, the Raiders are going to back up the truck for Tyler Linderbaum. Center is one of the most valued positions in Kubiak's offense, and they've got the cap to pay him top dollar." So, of course, that caught our attention for multiple reasons. Klint Kubiak, the offense, the Raiders. Tyler Linderbaum is a guy that a lot of folks expect for the Raiders to go after hot and heavy as far as free agency goes, and that's if he's able to get out of Baltimore. There's no saying that Baltimore is not going to find a way to re-sign him or hit him with the franchise tag themselves. So Ari did the due diligence, was able to get Brian on the radio show to close things out on Tuesday. A fantastic job. So I just wanted to bring a little bit of that conversation to the show here just to kind of expand on the convo that we were having about free agency, the offensive line, zone blocking scheme, and center, just like Brian was focused in on. So he starts off the conversation responding to my question about why the center, according to his tweet, is one of the most valued positions in Klint Kubiak's offense.
Yeah, as you guys get to know Klint Kubiak and talk to him more, I highly recommend asking him about the center position and what it takes to be a center in this system. He will light up and he will talk. One of the first things he will say is they've got to be really smart. They've got to be really smart and they've got to be really reliable, because in this system, not only does it rely on having a really athletic center who can get out and get on the outside, but a lot of times he puts all the line calls on the center and takes a lot of that responsibility off of the quarterback's shoulders. And if you guys are going to be going with a young quarterback, I think that's even more likely to be the case. So, I think if you look back at Klint Kubiak's history, at least the last few stops, it's pretty predictable. Like Eric McCoy was the center in New Orleans, and they gave him a boatload of money. This guy, when he was drafted, was a top 50 athlete at the center position out of 470 centers that had been measured since 1987. And then this past year, when he came to Seattle, there was a little bit of a center competition, and Olu Oluwatimi was the expected starter. But he wasn't really the athlete that Jalen Sundell was. Jalen Sundell was the 43rd ranked center as an athlete since 1987, and he became the starter. And so I think, yes, you've got Jackson Powers Johnson in the building. I don't know that he's the athlete, and I'm not positive, and I actually generally don't know if he's the mind that you need to be taking over at center with having a possibly very young quarterback behind him.
Yeah, tell us about, between the ears. That's obviously something that's very important. We've been talking about that with Fernando Mendoza and how he's got that. But why is it so important and so critical for that center to really have it between the ears?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to line calls. I mean, a lot of people talk about quarterbacks and pre-snap judgment, being able to read defenses and get things set up properly. A lot of OCs, especially in the Shanahan-Kubiak tree, try to take some of that responsibility off the shoulders of the quarterback. Let the quarterback look at coverages, look at other things, and have the center really responsible for identifying where the blitzes are coming from, where you need to shift protection, where there's a gap that might be uncovered. And you don't generally want a young, inexperienced guy or someone who's not super sharp taking on that kind of role, because not only can they be a problem for the play itself, but, you've got a very expensive developmental quarterback behind you. You do not want this guy to be disadvantaged by the center not really making the right calls before the play even starts.
One guy that's a free agent for Seattle right now is Josh Jones, the right tackle, the guy that filled in for Cross when he went down. How important would it be if the Raiders could find a way to get him out of Seattle and get him to Vegas?
That's an interesting idea. I'll say this. You said right tackle. I think Josh Jones has been billed as a swing tackle, and that's what he was signed for. But if you look back at his career, he's played his best ball at left tackle. Okay. And it doesn't mean he can't play right tackle, but I think he is more comfortable on the left side. People forget he played the last 3 games of this season for the Seahawks, games that were high leverage games against the Rams, against the 49ers, against the Panthers on the road. All playoff teams, all needed them to get to the number 1 seed, and he got them there. And I think one of the things that people don't realize about Josh Jones is not only did he hold up against Jared Verse on the final 2-point conversion against the Rams in overtime to win that game, which was a really, really big rep, but he was pretty injured after the Carolina game, and I didn't think he was going to be able to play based on what I was seeing of him in the locker room in the week after against the 49ers. He toughed that out. He got hurt again during that game, still came back and finished it. If he hadn't been able to play, it would have been an undrafted free agent for the Seahawks at left tackle. So Josh Jones was really impressive this year, and I think he's going to be a probably undervalued, potential starter at a tackle spot, and maybe at right tackle. That's an interesting idea.
What do you think about Seattle and their chances of trying to bring him back and retain him for everything that you just said, for what he was able to do?
Yeah, I mean, my initial thought was that he would be a guy they would try to bring back. But a couple of things I think are working against that. One, I think there's going to be people that realize that he put some good film out there the last 3 games of the year, and tackles are just too valuable to like have him make $4 million again to be a backup somewhere. So I think somebody's going to spend a little bit more. And the other thing is the Seahawks do have Amari Kite as well as Logan Brown. Both were undrafted free agents last year, but they are pretty high on those guys. And I think there's a pretty decent chance they're going to say, let's try to develop those young guys and bring them along and spend money elsewhere. Maybe bring back Rashid Shaheed, although I know the Raiders fans are hoping that's not the case. And maybe bring back, Josh Jobe or Ken Walker or some of the other places where they can shift the money as opposed to paying maybe, $8 million plus for Josh Jones.
I thought that was really good, detailed stuff from a guy that's been covering the Seahawks for quite a while. And as you heard him say, man, the more you get to know Klint Kubiak, talk to him about the offensive line, talk to him about the center position and the way he lights up. And that makes me remember when I got to catch up with him Tuesday after his press conference, when I just got to ask him a couple football questions that were zone blocking scheme and offensive line related. And that's when he talked about, you got to have athletic offensive linemen to run that scheme. You got to have a guy that's really smart. The center's got to be a really sharp guy. And that's what Brian was bringing to the table as well. So clearly, Klint Kubiak, wherever he's been, has made sure that center is a guy that gets paid top dollar, right? They want to make sure that they get the right center in there to run his offensive line and run that scheme, because it's so important to be able to call out the reads and do everything that you have to do. The responsibilities are so great. So, as much as I know a lot of Raider Nation loves JPJ, I would not be shocked at all to see them put him in a guard position as opposed to center and really go out there and invest heavily in the center position. Tyler Lindenbaum obviously is the number 1 choice for almost everyone, including myself. And then Josh Jones, you heard what he had to say about him. I've been calling him a right tackle. He did better at the left tackle spot, said it seemed like more of a natural fit, but clearly could be a swing tackle. So who knows what position he could play, but definitely a guy I would be interested in for the Raiders to go and get. Those 2 guys, if they can land those 2 guys in free agency, Tyler Lindenbaum and Josh Jones, I think you're off to a really good start, knowing you already have Colton Miller, knowing you have JPJ, knowing you have Caleb Rogers, knowing you have Charles Grant, right? You've got some options, right? You got DJ Glaze as well, and all those guys could compete for a couple spots. I think all of a sudden your liability on the offensive line goes from looking like a struggle to looking like a strength, especially if it has a lot better coaching than it did in 2025. And again, I believe Rick Dennison is going to be in charge of the offensive line I think he's going to be that coach. He may have a little bit of assistance as well. Again, we don't know exactly what his role has been because the Raiders have not, just confirmed that he is going to be on the coaching staff. That was just a report that was out there from CBS Sports. But hopefully you enjoyed that and kind of gave you a little bit more idea going back to the center position. And again, it was just from a tweet from Brian Nemhauser. Just a heads up, the Raiders are going to back up the truck for Tyler Lindenbaum. Center is one of the most valued positions in Kubiak's offense, and they've got the cap to pay him top dollar. What's on your mind? Your calls and texts will close out the show. 707-654-4693. We'll hear from you next. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of the show, and that's FanDuel. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. And here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. So if you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. I've been saying the top 4 teams, I do believe: the Thunder, the Spurs, the Pistons, and the Knicks, right? And the Boston Celtics, without Jason Tatum, is actually a surprisingly really good team this year as well. They're actually the number 2 team in the East. Futures this time of year are great. Whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title, it adds the extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can you pick cash, but it also could send you to the finals. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Before we get into any calls or texts, do want to thank you so much for making this the first listen of the day. Let's go ahead and start off with a call from Peg Leg Raider, my brother in San Antonio. He's calling to talk about a few questions he had from comments he heard from John Spytek even a year ago and some of the personnel decisions that were made. Here he is, Peg Leg Raider.
What up, Q? It's your boy Peg Leg Raider on I-35 headed north towards Central Texas, and I figured it'd be a good time to reach out to my man Q Knows Ball. So here's my question. Ever since Spytek's initial press conference following last year's draft, he said something that's been bothering me. And I'm curious if you can have a kind of off-the-record side conversation during the combine. So he had said in his prepared remarks before he started taking questions from y'all, he said something along the lines of, I got to, or I was able to, or they let me. I don't know exactly what the specific verbiage was. But basically he got to take 2 O-linemen. And it felt like there might have been some tension or some sort of disagreement then on the makeup of the O-line, what they were looking at, scheme and stuff going forward, all the way back before last year's draft. Could you have a side conversation or just get some background? Am I tripping? Am I reading too much into this? Or was there some sort of kind of background disagreement on what the line was supposed to look like? But Spytek really needed to have. He wanted linemen. He strikes me as a dude that's going to take an O lineman or a D lineman every single draft. I don't know. It's just been sitting with me for a year. And I figure the combine might be a good time, and you can tactfully ask that. The other question I have, where Besh and Dante Thornton were taken, it seems way too high for the limited amount of burn they got. I'm curious if that was a disagreement in starting young players in scheme and fit and their ability to grasp Chip Kelly's offense. Could you find out a little bit more about that, and if there's some sort of like comprehensive strategy to get them more involved going forward? I'd be really curious about those 2 things. Thanks for all you do, Q. Keep up the great work. It's going to be a busy off season, but I know you got us through all this, so strap in. One love, Raider Nation.
Peg Leg, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. Thank you for your service as always. And yeah, I remember that comment from John Spytek. It's funny you mentioned that. He's definitely a guy that loves to draft offensive linemen. You know, he did get 2 in the 3rd round this past draft. I think he's going to get a couple more. And you're spot on. When you say that he feels like a guy and seems like a guy that's going to draft a couple offensive linemen each and every year, he is. He's made that perfectly clear that he loves his offensive lineman and wants to make sure he's able to get a couple of those guys in the draft. There was a lot of miscommunications and breakdowns between the Raiders, Pete Carroll, John Spytek, Chip Kelly last year. There was a lot that, just went wrong. And unfortunately, we didn't know about it till, 3, 4, 5 weeks into the season. That's unfortunate. There was a big difference in philosophies. There was times when Spytek even said that he had to remind Pete Carroll that he needs his draft picks. Right, Pete Carroll wanted to trade them all away and bring in other players. He already gave away a draft pick to bring in Geno Smith. He wanted to give away multiple draft picks to bring in other guys, including, I believe, DK Metcalf was the guy that Pete Carroll wanted to bring in. And John Spytek's like, man, I'm not giving away all my draft picks, right? I need my draft picks to get this team turned around. So they clearly had a difference of philosophy from the jump, and that's unfortunate because, well, I thought that it was going to be a nice, good 1-2 pairing, a seasoned veteran coach, been there, done that with a heck of a resume, and a young, up-and-coming GM that can really help, kind of ease himself into the position and kind of learn from a guy who's been there, done that, and put together a roster, and clearly that was not the case. Peg Leg, thanks so much for the call. Definitely appreciate you. Got a text from Raider Ed in Vegas. Said, good morning, Q. Raider Ed here in Vegas. Loving the hire so far. I was watching your Locked On show today, and all I heard was calls and texts about the Captain Obvious need for offensive line upgrades and line coaches upgrades. The bigger question for me is who will be our linebackers, DBs, and wide receiver one? I'd like to know your thoughts on those positions. I think they're going to be more difficult to fill. Lastly, I think the lousy coaching at the offensive line position really created a question mark for this group. Are they that bad, or was it a product of incompetent coaching? I think it's coaching. Let me know your thoughts. Go Raiders. That's Raider Ed in Vegas. And thanks so much for the text. I appreciate you. And it's funny, one of our colleagues, Adam Hill from the Las Vegas Review-Journal, he actually is writing a piece right now about how the offensive line really wasn't as bad as it looked last year. And a lot of it did have to do with coaching. So you're onto something there. I still believe it needs to be upgraded. I think that the Raiders need to add 2 starters to the offensive line for sure. But I don't think it was quite as bad as it looked, and I think a lot of it had to do with coaching. And like I said, Adam Hill's writing that piece on it as well. Linebackers are definitely a big need, right? That's why I mentioned Devin Lloyd on Tuesday's show. That would be a nice addition if they could bring him in free agency because E-Rob, Jamal Adams, Devin White, all those guys are free agents. I don't really expect any of those guys to come back, maybe one. For depth purposes. They have Cody Lindenberg, they have Tommy Eichenberg, but they definitely need to address the linebacker position. I think some of that will be in the draft, and I think you can get a good one in free agency as well. As far as wide receiver one, I think your best bet is probably to dip into the draft and go and get a guy from Indiana. Go get Elijah Surratt. Go get Omar Cooper, one of those guys that is familiar with Fernando Mendoza, and just kind of get them back on the same page and a guy that they're very comfortable with. He's very comfortable with, and they kind of ease him into that position. You already have Brock Bowers as your target number one, right? I think that you can do that. You can still try to develop Jack Besh and Dante Thornton Jr. because those guys obviously didn't get enough burn out there in year one, just based off of everything that was going on and all the dysfunction that the Raiders have. That actually goes back to Peg Leg Raiders' call about, Besh and Thornton not being able to get out there and get some burn. Again, just bad philosophy, differences of philosophies. It just didn't work out in any way, shape, or form. Thanks so much for the text. I appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Gonzo Raider in the 505. He's calling to talk about the excitement level he has, but also wants to stress Pacentia. I had to say that very carefully. Before I mess around and say something I ain't supposed to say. Here's Gonzo Raider in the 505.
Q, what's up, man? Gonzo Raider here from the 505. Kind of excited about all the changes that are happening, all the additions, all the coaches that are being hired. Kind of refreshing to hear. Didn't want to take too much time or rehash stuff that's already been talked about. But there's a word we use here in New Mexico quite often. It's called paciencia. Patience. Please, Raider Nation, just have patience with this coaching staff. One loss or bad play or a questionable decision is not the end of the world. We don't have to raise up the signs to fire and to go different directions and do this or that. Let's just have patience. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's a rebuild. So let's just all have some paciencia. Let's just have some patience. No more rinse and repeat. Let's go. Pumped up for the season. Let's go, Raiders.
Gonzo, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. And now I think I know another word. Now I'm gonna get all crazy. Placentia. I gotta say it slow though, because if I get cute, try to say it fast, I might mess it up and say it wrong, and I might mess around and say placentia. I might say something else that maybe not too appropriate. You know what I mean? Like, who knows which direction my dumb self could go. So Patience. Let's just say patience, and let me not try to get too cute. But yes, and yes, that is going to be needed for sure. Gonzo, thanks for the call, man. Thanks for having some fun with us today on the show. Definitely appreciate that. Got a text from Missouri Raider. Hey, Q, I was listening to the Squad Show, and towards the end, Lincoln said someone asked him, can the offensive line be fixed in 1 year? And he said, absolutely. I agree with Link, but I don't think people have to wonder, can it be fixed in a year? It's been in motion for a couple years already. We had a JPJ 2 drafts ago. We had a Rodgers and Grant draft last draft. And if we add free agents and more draft picks this year, we could definitely get this line fixed quickly. Not to mention we already have Colton. Just wanted to point out that we aren't fixing it in just 1 year. We've already been working on it. Now we can hopefully just add a couple veterans and a couple more young guys, add to the mix and see what 5 rise to the top. Hoping and praying we could put together an offensive line good as, if not better than, our former car insurance. That's from Missouri Raider. He is out. That's a good point that you bring up, right? I mean, JPJ was a second-round pick, not last year, but the year before that. Obviously, Caleb Rogers and Charles Grant was added to the mix last year. They didn't really get out there that much, especially Charles Grant. Caleb Rogers got some towards the end, but not Charles Grant. Colton Miller coming back healthy. At some point, you're going to have to replace Colton Miller at that left tackle position. I definitely see a couple free agents incoming, and I definitely believe that John Spytek will draft a couple more. So you're right. It technically won't be turned around in 1 year, but you just want it to look a whole hell of a lot better than it did last year. That is for sure. So thanks so much for the text. Appreciate you. Thanks for checking out this show and also the Raiders Squad Show. One more call. We'll take this from Sweet T Raider. He's calling to talk about some free agents the Raiders could use, and he's focusing in on the offensive side of things. Here's Sweet T Raider.
Hey, Q, it's Sweet T Raider. Just wanted to run a couple things by you. If we're worrying about filling out the team, we've got a few positions open. I think for defense, I think we could definitely use a lot of our draft picks towards that. Because offense, I think we're needing experience, especially with Fernando coming in, hopefully. Let's see some of that cap space to hopefully build up that O-line with experience. I know that zone blocking scheme is pretty tough, and so I think getting some guys out of college that aren't proven yet may not be the best option. So signing a vet with proven experience would be great. And I think beefing up that receiver core would be essential too. And so going into that, I'm thinking okay, just now I saw that Mike Evans is open to explore his options. I think Mike Evans is good at running those out routes, which is what Fernando likes. And so I think he'd be a great option. And another option I think would be DK Metcalf. He's a big receiver. He can definitely run downfield with that speed and also use that strength to get open and catch those balls. Let me know what you think. I think that could be a possible strategy to fill out that team and give Fernando enough to work with. But thanks for all you do, Q. Have a good one. Bye.
Sweet T, thanks for the call. Mike Evans and DK Metcalf, really good players. Evans is a guy that's been great since Texas A&M when he was tearing it up with Johnny Manziel, but his age and his cost, I don't think he makes a lot of sense for a team that's building, right? I mean, this guy's going on, year 14? I would look to one of Mendoza's college wide receivers, as I mentioned before, Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper for familiarity. DK Metcalf, he's a Steeler, right? He just got traded there last season. They gave him a big contract extension, so I'd be shocked to see him moved. His age is good. The money is high, but he's a younger dude, so I wouldn't mind a guy like that getting paid and being part of the team, but I just don't see that happening. I don't see the Steelers moving on from him after 1 year and trading him just like that. I just don't see that happening. Don't know if he fits in with the kind of locker room personality and characteristics that John Spytek is looking for either. He obviously got suspended last year in Pittsburgh and almost cost the Steelers their season based off getting suspended. So I don't know if that's the kind of guy, the kind of personality that the Raiders want in their locker room. But like I said, he's under contract, long-term extension with the Pittsburgh Steelers, so I'd be shocked to see him get moved at any time soon, that is. So thanks so much for the call. Definitely appreciate you. Like I said, I would dip into the draft and go get those at least one of those wide receivers from Indiana. Got a text from 973 Raider. We'll get that tomorrow. A text from Raider Rob in Pittsburgh. How about Zachariah Branch? That's another wide receiver I'd look for. Obviously, he's the nephew of Cliff Branch. Maybe it's not so obvious, but he is the nephew of Cliff Branch. He's a guy that went to Bishop Gorman here in Las Vegas, went to USC, then transferred to Georgia. He's a fantastic, just difference maker. He's an explosive player waiting to happen, right? He's just a big play. That's what he is, whether it's in the kick return game, in the wide receiver game, whatever it is. I mean, he gets his hands on the ball, good things happen. So that's another wide receiver I'd look out for as well. So that's going to do it for real for today's show. That's all I got time for. Definitely appreciate all the great feedback, texts, calls. We'll have more of that coming up tomorrow. We'll have more news and notes, see how Klint Kubiak continues to build his coaching staff. And, of course, we'll have plenty of conversation here as well. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.